Am I the asshole for not explicitly stating my punch is non-alcoholic? I've always liked work parties, not because they're particularly exciting, but because they're predictable. You show up, you talk about how busy the last quarter was, you pretend to admire someone's casserole, and then you go home feeling like you fulfilled your social obligation. So when my boss announced he was hosting an end-of-season potluck at his house, I didn't think twice. I volunteered to bring the same punch I'd made for previous events, the one everybody called dangerously drinkable, even though it was literally just ginger ale, 7-Up, orange juice, and a frozen juice concentrate. A sugar bomb, sure, but nothing more. It was supposed to be simple. I make the punch, I bring some Freet, and we all enjoy a low-stress evening. And because several coworkers don't drink, I'd kept it non-alcoholic, just like I had done before. In every past gathering, people added their own alcohol if they wanted to spike it. I figured the same logic applied here. And honestly, it didn't cross my mind that this could become a problem. It's a bowl of punch at a potluck, not a chemistry experiment. The party itself was casual and warm, in the usual suburban cookout sort of way. My boss lives in one of those neighborhoods where all the houses resemble each other, just enough that you can tell they were built by the same developer, but not enough that you can accuse anyone of copying. His backyard was already full of people when I arrived. Some had their spouses, some didn't, and a few had clearly pre-gamed before showing up because they were louder than the music and hadn't even reached the buffet line yet. I set the punch bowl on a table near the drinks, placed the fruit beside it, and stepped back as a small wave of nostalgia hit me. I remembered bringing this to my first office event years ago, terrified no one would like it, only for everyone to go back for seconds. That familiarity made me feel comfortable, like the night would unfold exactly the way it always had. Chatter, laughter, compliments about the punch, and then everyone going home early because we're adults with early alarms. For the first hour or two, everything felt normal. People came up to me asking if this was the punch, and I nodded. I got the usual comments, like, "You always make the best stuff," and "Wow, this is so refreshing." Someone even joked that I should bottle it and sell it. Meanwhile, people were grabbing beers or wine from the cooler, and my boss had a small bar set up on a side table for those who wanted something stronger. Nothing unusual, nothing remotely dramatic. That calm, predictable atmosphere is part of why I didn't think twice when I saw Sandy drifting around being louder than usual. Sandy's one of those coworkers who talks like she wants the whole room to hear her, even when she's only speaking to one person. She's dramatic on a normal day, so a little extra dramatic wasn't exactly alarming. I assumed she was enjoying the host's open bar. We all did. Plenty of people were drinking casually, and it wasn't the kind of party where anyone was policing how much you poured. But after a while, her voice seemed to rise above the crowd in a different way. Not friendly, not excited, just unsteady. She stumbled while trying to sit down, laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and waved her arms like she was trying to air out invisible smoke. I watched from across the yard and shrugged, assuming she had gotten into something pretty strong. Maybe a margarita someone mixed too heavy, maybe wine on an empty stomach. It didn't occur to me for a second that she was drinking my punch and believing it was alcoholic. At that point in the night, everything still felt harmless. I was sipping my non-alcoholic cup, talking to coworkers, completely unaware that the real story of the night was about to begin. I didn't realize anything was truly off until Sandy suddenly toppled sideways out of her chair. Conversations around her faltered, and a few people reached out instinctively, not sure whether to help or pretend they didn't see it. She popped back up almost immediately, brushing off invisible dust and laughing in this exaggerated, theatrical way that made every movement feel rehearsed. Then she held up her cup toward me like she was making a toast and declared, "Wow, your punch is strong." I froze for a second, unsure if I heard her right. Maybe she was joking. Maybe she was talking to someone else. But she kept staring at me, her expression bright and flushed, as though she expected applause for how drunk she had gotten off of my juice. People nearby chuckled politely, but the undertone of confusion was unmistakable. Before I could process it, Sandy started weaving her way across the patio toward me. She wasn't walking so much as swaying forward in dramatic zigzags, the kind of movement people exaggerate when they want everyone to know they've been drinking. When she stopped in front of me, she leaned a little too close and asked, loud enough for the entire cluster of coworkers to hear, "So what did you put in the punch? Because I've been drinking it all night and ooh, I feel it." My first reaction was confusion, then concern, then a reluctant kind of embarrassment, as if I had accidentally poisoned her. I told her exactly what was in it: ginger ale, 7-Up, orange juice, and juice concentrate. She stared at me blankly for several seconds, her eyebrows twitching upward in a way that made her look like she was trying to read tiny subtitles in her mind. Then she asked again, slower this time, as though I somehow didn't understand the question. "No, but what alcohol?" My stomach dropped. The whole conversation had become its own little spotlight, and a few coworkers had steadily inched closer, trying to listen without looking obvious. One of them, who I know doesn't drink at all for religious reasons, spoke up first. He said he'd been drinking the punch too and was completely sober. Another chimed in and confirmed no one had spiked the bowl. Even the host checked his bar table just to be safe. But Sandy wasn't hearing any of it. She stood frozen, her expression twisting in a way I couldn't decipher. Then, as if someone flipped a switch inside her, she went silent. Completely silent. No more dramatic gestures, no theatrics. She just stared at the floor, turned around abruptly, and walked off toward the house without saying another word. The moment she disappeared inside, everyone exhaled at once. Someone muttered that maybe she hadn't eaten enough. Another whispered something about the power of suggestion. A couple people laughed awkwardly because they didn't know what else to do. I just stood there holding my cup of harmless punch, wondering whether this whole thing was a bizarre prank or whether Sandy had genuinely convinced herself she was drunk. She left the party not long after that. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look at anyone. She simply walked out the front door with her head down, her keys gripped in one hand like she was afraid someone would take them away from her. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a text. I expected it to be a coworker joking about what had happened, or maybe someone asking for the punch recipe, like they usually do. Instead, it was a long paragraph from Sandy. Angry, accusatory, filled with exclamation points, and directed entirely at me. She said I'd humiliated her. She said I'd made her look foolish in front of the bosses. She said I should have just kept quiet and let the moment pass. And then she ended it with the most bizarre line of all. "You knew what you were doing." I stared at the message, trying to understand how telling the truth about juice had turned into a personal attack. But that was only the beginning of the fallout. The next morning, at work felt strange before I even saw Sandy. You know that subtle shift in atmosphere when something has clearly happened, but no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it? That was the entire office. People were quieter, glancing up from their desks when I walked past, then quickly pretending to focus again. It wasn't hostile, just tense, like we were all waiting for the same shoe to drop. When Sandy finally arrived, she didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone, really. She marched straight to her desk, opened her laptop with unnecessary force, and put on her headphones. Even though she almost never wore them, the message was clear. Don't talk to her, don't look at her, don't exist anywhere in her peripheral vision. I tried to go on with my day, answering emails and finishing reports, but it was impossible to ignore the icy wall forming across the room. Every time someone walked near her, she stiffened. Whenever I got up to refill my water, she suddenly found something else to stare at. If I laughed at something a coworker said, she shot a glare that felt like it could snap pencil lead. She wasn't subtle about her anger. She wanted everyone to know she felt wronged. By lunchtime, the tension had become so obvious that 2 coworkers pulled me aside in the break room to ask what happened. I recounted the entire thing, exactly as it unfolded. They exchanged looks, half amusement, half pity, and told me I hadn't done anything wrong. One of them even said, "Look, if she pretended to be drunk off juice, that's on her, not you." Another added that the punch was clearly labeled as just punch on the potluck sheet, and that she had no business assuming it was anything else. But still, the guilt lingered. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because being the accidental catalyst for someone else's humiliation isn't exactly a pleasant position. I kept replaying the scene in my mind. The fall, the questioning, the moment she realized the punch wasn't alcoholic. There was a tiny part of me that wondered if I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have deflected the question. Maybe I could have joked it off the way people do in sitcoms. Oh wow, must have been the sugar. Something harmless, something that would let her keep her dignity intact. But every time that thought surfaced, another part of me pushed back. There were people at the party who absolutely needed to know whether that punch had alcohol, coworkers who avoid it for health, religious, or personal reasons. Lying would have put them at risk. And at a work event, the last thing you want is to mislead someone into thinking something is sober safe when it isn't. The rest of the afternoon dragged. Sandy remained silent, stewing in whatever version of the evening she'd built in her mind. At one point, I walked past her desk on my way to the printer, and she exhaled sharply, like I'd committed some subtle personal offense by existing within her range of hearing. I wasn't sure what she wanted from me. An apology? An admission of wrongdoing? A confession that I'd masterminded an elaborate plan to expose her? The idea was ridiculous, but the way she acted made it seem like she truly believed I'd orchestrated her embarrassment. By 4 p.m., word had spread around the office far more than I expected. People didn't say much to me directly, but their reactions told the story. Sympathetic smiles, raised eyebrows, whispered conversations drifting out of cubicles. Someone even sent me a meme about the placebo effect with a little laughing emoji. And though I chuckled, I also felt uneasy. I didn't want to turn this into gossip, yet it was already spiraling that way. When I finally left the building, I felt drained. Not physically, but mentally. The whole situation gnawed at me in a way that was hard to shake. I hadn't lied, I hadn't tricked her, I hadn't embarrassed her on purpose, but somehow I had still become the villain in Sandy's story. And I had a feeling things were only going to get stranger from here. Over the next few days, Sandy's hostility didn't fade. It calcified. She stopped acknowledging me entirely. If I entered a room, she left. If someone spoke to both of us, she answered only the other person, like I wasn't even there. It was childish, but also uncomfortable. Offices thrive on basic politeness, and she was actively dismantling it one cold shoulder at a time. The surprising part wasn't her behavior, it was the way everyone else reacted to it. Slowly, people started approaching me individually to say they'd witnessed the whole thing at the party and thought the situation was absurd. A few even joked that if Sandy could get drunk off my punch, I should start selling it as a miracle beverage. Others just shook their heads, calling the incident classic attention-seeking gone wrong. And the more people shared their perspective, the clearer it became Sandy wasn't angry because she'd been exposed. She was angry because she'd exposed herself. The truth is, everyone had seen her acting ridiculous long before she interrogated me about the alcohol. Falling out of chairs, stumbling across the patio, shouting over casual conversations, none of that was my doing. She had simply convinced herself she was the star of some party scene, and when the truth popped that bubble, she didn't know where else to aim her embarrassment except directly at me. Eventually, the whole thing reached a breaking point. We ended up in the copy room at the same time, and for once, she didn't bolt. She just stared at the machine like she was waiting for it to offer her answers. After an awkward silence, she finally muttered, without looking at me, "You didn't have to make me look stupid." Her tone wasn't angry anymore. It was small, like the words weighed more than she wanted to admit. And for the first time, I saw the real root of all this. Not rage, not indignation, but shame. Deep, burning middle school level shame. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I hadn't tried to embarrass her. I reminded her that other people needed to know the punch was non-alcoholic, and I wasn't going to lie in front of them. I also pointed out that none of this would have happened if she hadn't insisted on performing drunkenness as if it were a talent show act. She didn't respond. She didn't apologize. She just nodded once, barely, and walked out of the room. And honestly, that tiny half nod was the closest thing to closure I was ever going to get from her. After that conversation, things settled. She didn't become friendly, but the outright hostility stopped. No more glares, no more exaggerated avoidance. She just existed in the same space as me again, which was all I needed.
Looking back, the whole situation still feels surreal. All I did was bring a bowl of juice to a potluck. Somehow that spiraled into workplace tension, emotional fallout, and a crash course in the placebo effect. But the lesson was simple enough. Sometimes people don't get angry at you, they get angry at the version of themselves they accidentally revealed. And there's nothing in my punch recipe strong enough to fix that.